I will be discussing about the next topic. So I hope you all have understood that what is the interface between media and psychology, which we discussed in our previous class. In today's class, we are talking about next topic as per your syllabus, which is fantasy and reality. Before I begin, my understanding of fantasy and reality, I would like to ask you that what is fantasy as per you?
Ma'am, I think it's we dream something which is actually improbable, which isn't true or which can never be true, is what
Which
I can
is
perceive of fantasy as.
okay, okay, which is not true. Okay. Anything else? Anything else? What is fantasy?
Ma'am,
A
you
fantasy, a
can say a
desire.
desire.
I'll be saying it's a desire. Richa has mentioned that it is the supernatural thing. Okay.
Ma'am, it's
Ma'am,
something fictional.
It's an
Fictional,
imaginative reality.
imaginative reality.
Daydream.
A daydream, Mansi has said.
Ma'am, fantasy for one, maybe reality. Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I said fantasy for one, maybe reality for another. For another person, it may be reality.
Fantasy for one and reality for another person. Yes, yes, very true. Very true. Anyone else who would like to say?
A
Make
world of
comment.
imagination.
World of imagination. We have many, many interesting answers of what fantasy is. All right. So let me share my screen with all of you and we will discuss about it in little detail. Okay, so we all have discussed what is fantasy. Now we need to look into the things that how fantasy becomes reality seen through media influence. And whatever I'm going to discuss today is based on a book which is a part of your course, How Fantasy Becomes Reality Seen Through Media Influence by Karen Adel. So my class is based on this book itself. Okay, today my question is that when media is showing a fiction or a fantasy, are you able to identify that it is reality or it is fantasy? Are you able to identify that or not?
There's not a clear-cut difference. I mean, if someone, let's say, who is not a journalism student per se, or somebody who's very new to absorbing media, cannot make out a clear-cut definition of what's a reality and what's a fantasy, until and unless he connects his own life experiences to it. Only then I think we will be able to get some traces of what is fantasy and what is reality, but yet there wouldn't be a complete difference. But for us, it's probably yes, 90% we can.
So everybody has their own opinion about the fantasy, about the reality. So as I said, that when I discuss the effects of exposure to mass media with students like you, I get varied answer. But one of the comments I hear most often is that uh, anyone old enough to know the difference between fantasy and reality is not affected by media content. If you are old enough, you are adult enough, you are knowledgeable enough to know the difference that this is a reality and this is a fantasy, then you do not have any effect of media on you. Do you believe in it? Is it correct?
To an
Correct.
extent, it's I feel it's correct, but to the other side, media is the dominant of information, and whoever owns the information is actually the king. So, no, it has to be taken seriously in every sphere of life. But yeah, to an extent, there can be a cut from media if that awareness comes.
Correct. Absolutely correct. So, in other words, I can say that they are fictional stories. And fictional stories do not influence us because we know they are not real. They don't influence us at all.
Honestly, fiction is like a projection, or it's like you could say it's a reflection of reality itself. I mean, all fiction is derived from reality, so it's a way of projecting that reality in a
So
world that may be fiction.
interesting. So it's a way of projecting the reality. So taking note from here, I can say the fantasy or reality argument represents a major misunderstanding of psychology of the media. Whether it's reality, it has been taken from the reality, or it is fantasy, it is reality. So let's go one by one. I know this discussion is never ending. It has several layers to it. But first, let's look more closely at the words of like fantasy and reality. When an adult says he or she knows the difference between fantasy and reality, how is she defining each word? I think by fantasy, many of you also said, when I asked what is fantasy to you, is many of you said it means fiction. And if we go by dictionary meaning as well, the word fiction has a variety of meanings in itself. Fiction can mean creation or an invention of the imagination, creation and invention of the imagination, and all these imaginations can be fantasy. I'm leaving it to you. I'm just giving you some fodder to think. Fiction can mean a lie, which is not true. Fiction means it's not true. I don't know how correct it is when I say it's a lie, but maybe fiction is not true. Stories are classified as either truth or fiction. Literature. I'm a literature student, so if I talk about literature as is always divided into this is fiction, this is non-fiction. When someone says media do not affect him because he knows the difference between fantasy and reality, I think he means by reality that people and situations on television are contrived and invented. They are not real. Therefore, I know whatever they are doing is not real. Okay, let me give you an example. We know, for example, that recently there was a TV series called Arya, which is streaming now. Arya, आप लोगों ने देखी है? किसने देखी Arya?
Ma'am, amazing.
It's
It's an
amazing.
amazing show.
It's an amazing show.
I mean, how it brings together Bhagavad Gita and the dichotomy of Bhagavad Gita and her own family. I mean, it's worth a watch.
It's worth a watch, right? The TV show Arya is a fictional story about the relationships, and in what we say, in what ways is the story based in fiction rather than facts. But when we are watching this series, we tend to believe that whatever is shown there is real. Well, the adult audience is aware that the people in the stories are actors who are paid to play this particular part. Our mind knows this. You all know. A young woman whose name is Arya in the story is played by an actress named Shushmita Sen. You all know that this person's Arya's reality is Shushmita Sen, right? For example, the house in which Arya stayed is not the real house. It is Arya is a character living in actually a set. It is a set, right? We know it. You all know it. The dialogues in the creation of are created by professional writers. So the stories on TV shows were products of the imagination of writers and producers and the series and the serial makers and actors who are presenting it there. And we watch And when we watch a fictional TV show, we are essentially imagining what if these were real people and these situations and events are real. And we start enjoying that, believing that the story, whatever story is there in the series of Arya, is real. But the moment you start believing, oh, जो दिखा रहे हो तो सब नकली है, और ये आर्या थोड़ी है तो सुष्मिता सेन है, और ये घर थोड़ी है तो सेट है, ये डायलॉग थोड़ी बोले तो किसने लिखा है और वो पढ़ रही है. The moment you start believing that, you will miss out the chance of getting entertained. You stop enjoying that series. For example, many times this thing happens with a reality show called Big Boss. When you watch Big Boss, many of you must be big fans of Big Boss. Many of you maybe love to hate the show, and you say, "Oh, ये तो सब scripted है." जहाँ पे आपको मालूम है कि वो स्क्रिप्टेड है, आर्या आपको पता है कि वो स्क्रिप्टेड है, तो आपको अमेजिंग. और जहाँ पे आपको दिखाया जा रहा है कि ये रियलिटी शो है और आप उसको डिसलाइक करने लग जाते हो उस मोमेंट पे जब आपको लगता है कि यार ये तो स्क्रिप्टेड है, ये तो नकली है. पर जो चीज आपको पता है कि वो नकली है, आपको लगने लग जाए कि आप उसको इतना रियल मानने लग जाते हो कि जहाँ पे आपको लगे कि नकली, आप वहां छोड़ देते हो. Are you understanding the dichotomy between what is real, what is fiction, and what is reality? So what you mean to say maybe is you are, or we as an audience are entertained by a story that we imagine in our mind's eye as really happening. अगर आप कोई हॉरर शो भी देखते हो या आप कोई साइकोलॉजिकल डिसऑर्डर वाली फिल्म देखते हो, साइको किलर की मूवी देखते हो, आप डरते हो, पर आपको पता है कि वो एक्टिंग हो रही है, पर आपको डर लगता है देख के, क्योंकि आप अपने दिमाग को ये कहते हो कि मानो वो सच है, मानो वहां एक भूत आने वाला है, मानो कि वहां पे एक किलर आने वाला है, और उसको बिलीव करके देखो. You start believing that fiction into a reality, then only you feel scared. Otherwise, what's the point of being scared?
Yes, and ma'am, more than just the story, it's how we perceive that story that ends up in a psychological. Like usually when we watch psychological thrillers, we're left with this empty feeling. We're left with this existential mayhem that okay, what was that story really about? It has interpretations to it. It's usually open-ended, and it's a very interesting genre to reveal.
Yes. So,
Ma'am, because
go ahead.
Ma'am, because even if we consciously know that the difference between fantasy and reality, but subconsciously there are some things which really affect us. Like, although if we are watching a movie and we know that the characters are just, the actors are just playing a character, but on some subconscious level, it has an impact. Like, even if we accept it or not, but there is an impact.
There is an impact.
Ma'am, I also think there might be some traits of the characters that we are possibly being able to relate to as humans, and we try to find ourselves in them. So that.
Yes, I think that's like usually we watch films for escapism. Films used to be made because the audience wanted to escape reality, but nowadays films are made so that audiences find a reflection in that reality. Like people go to watch fiction because they want to see themselves portrayed, and I think it's a very beautiful element.
So the line between the fiction and reality is actually merging, is dissolving. I don't think people would be much entertained by fiction if they thought of it purely as a lie. That could never happen. I think the truth is quite the opposite. To the extent that we believe these characters and these circumstances and relationships are plausible and valuable, we take an interest in them. To the extent that we buy into the fantasy, we are drawn into the show, into the film. Inki ye to meri kahani hai. So where does the reality come in? What is a more meaningful definition of reality in this context? The reality of a fictional story is not whether it is a fantasy or a creation. It is whether it is believable and attractive. हमें उस चीज पे विश्वास हो रहा है या हम चाहते हैं कि कुछ ऐसा हो जाए, कुछ अगर ऐसी कोई आउट ऑफ द ब्लू कुछ चीज निकाल कर जो हो ही नहीं सकती तो उसको आप देखने में मजा भी नहीं आएगा. One definition of fiction, again from the dictionary, is something which is artificial or counterfeit. Specifically, a likeness made to pass for a real thing. कि कुछ ऐसा लग रहा है real thing पर वो है नहीं, सच्चाई है नहीं. So fiction can actually mean a story created to pass for the real thing. A story created to pass for the real thing. Paradoxically, then the best kind of fantasies are the ones that strike us as in some way real or genuine. I think one of the joys of experiences really good fantasy and fiction is very fact that they allow us to imagine what if this happens, what if, to feel as though a very interesting or gratifying story could be true. सच में हो जाए तो कितना मजा. Everybody has their own what if tagline during their generation, and if stories in movies replicate it in their form, that what makes them desirable movies. So there's another theory which comes from here. The theory explaining why people are persuaded by information in fictional stories is called transportation. There's a theory called transportation. What this theory says that people reading a book, watching a movie or a TV show or maybe playing video games become transported or swept up or lost in the story, even feeling like they themselves are part of the story. This is one of the appealing properties of media, being transported, swept up or lost in the story, even feeling like they themselves are part of it. if ये जो कैरेक्टर है जो इस वीडियो गेम में खेल रहा है वो मैं हूँ, और अगर वो कैरेक्टर उस वीडियो गेम में मर गया तो मैं मर गया. आपको पता है वो फैंटेसी है, वो रियल नहीं है, और आपने उसको इतना रियल बना लिया है. This is one of the appealing properties of media, being transported in a state of flow in which the person loses track of time. आप खेल रहे हो, आप देख रहे हो, and you get so deeply engaged into it. When a fictional story transports us, we are persuaded rather than uncritically, because transportation decreases counter-arguing. You have been transported. You are not questioning it. You're not questioning whether this character is real or not. You're not questioning whether this set is real or not. You have been transported there. And it increases connection with the characters in the sense that the story has reality to it. Engaging with the story means we have suspended our disbeliefs. अब हम मान चुके हैं वो चीज. And this facilitates our persuasion to point of view embedded in the story. And in fact, there are some other theories which believe that we accept beliefs not only uncritically but voluntarily. हम चाहते हैं, वो जो आपने खुद बोला कि आप escapism वाली theory है कि आप एक escapist theory को लेके जा रहे हो कि अब हम उस fictional world में जाके उसको enjoy करना चाहते हैं और हम उस fictional world को reality समझ रहे हैं. और आप बहुत बार उस fictional world से इस तरह की information, इस तरह के acts, इस तरह का behavior लेकर आते हो अपनी real life में और उस पे ही चलने लग जाते हो. If I may give an example, अगर आपने fictional world पे किसी शादी में कोई पर्टिकुलर गाने पे डांस होते हुए देखा, तो आपके घर में या आपकी फैमिली में जब रियल में शादी होगी तो आप उस गाने पे डांस करते हो उस तरह से. तो आप क्या कर रहे हो? आपने क्यों सोचा कि मुझे इस गाने पे डांस करना चाहिए? वो तो फिक्शन है, वो तो कहीं फिक्शनल स्टोरी चल रही थी और कोई और एक्ट्रेस और किसी और सेट पे किसी फिक्शनल गाने पे डांस कर रही है, पर आपने उसको पिक करके अपनी रियलिटी में प्रेजेंट कर दिया, फिट कर दिया। या कितनी बार बातचीत जब आप कर रहे हो, आप बातचीत करते समय वो भाषा, वो बिहेवियर लेकर आपने अपनी रियलिटी में उस फिक्शन से इंस्पायर होके आपने, या आपके you like some media personality and you start behaving like that. Not everyone. You start dressing up like that person. So let's review some facts. So fact 1, we spend most of our waking hours watching media. Fact number 2, research shows clearly that media are powerful and affect us in many, many ways. Fact number 3, many of us passionately disbelieve that this is fiction, this is not true, this is lie. And there's in this book, which I'm showing you, Karen has called it media manipulation denial syndrome. Media manipulation denial syndrome. इसका मतलब है कि media manipulation denial syndrome happens when a puppet bounces across the puppet stage, bragging that nobody pulls his strings. Let me repeat this. When a puppet bounds across the puppet stage, bragging that nobody pulls his strings. What does it mean? What does it mean? Now,
Ma'am, that a piece of media is like maybe you have maybe you are like so into that piece of media, you've immersed yourself so much in it that you start believing that that's how you are and not the way the media has affected you, and then you start saying that it's how I've always been and deny the media's involvement at all, something like that. Maybe.
आपको डिनाई कर रहे हो कि मीडिया आपको घुमा रहा है, आप उस चीज को डिनाई कर रहे हो, आपको पता है। I'll share this paper with you, जिसमें वो बात कर रहे हैं कि कैसे मीडिया मैनिपुलेशन वाली स्टेज पे आप आ जाते हो और आप उसको बिलीव करने लग जाते हो। Okay, if I may end my talk here and want you people to write one line summary of how fantasy becomes reality. What is your understanding, takeaway from this class? Just write it in one line.
So I end my class here, and you can send me the your answer, your takeaway of the class in the chat box. Thank you.